For nearly 70 years, the world has accepted one version of James Dean's death: a tragic crash, a bright future extinguished. But new analysis suggests the story isn't just incomplete, it's far more troubling. Dean was still breathing when rescuers reached his mangled Porsche, wedged between the pedals and pinned in place. Reports describe a frantic struggle to free him, but that wasn't the end of the chaos. A second, almost forgotten moment may have delivered the final blow, a moment experts only recently re-examined with fresh eyes. Now, investigators believe they've finally cracked the case, uncovering details that challenge everything we thought we knew. And the conclusion they're pointing toward? It's not just shocking. It might be the darkest chapter in the entire James Dean legend. A chill before the crash. James Dean's final film, Giant, was only the third major project of his career, but it ended up being one of the most pivotal. While working on that set, he crossed paths with Elizabeth Taylor, whose legendary violet eyes had a way of stopping even the biggest Hollywood names in their tracks. Dean was no exception. He became so enchanted with her that he reportedly walked straight up to her husband, Michael Wilding, and declared that he had fallen in love with Taylor and believed she would one day divorce him and marry Dean. It was bold, it was dramatic, and it was so perfectly in line with Dean's unpredictable nature. Of course, that love story never materialized, just like so many of his past would-be romances. But there was one connection in Dean's life that stood apart from the rest, one that wasn't built on fleeting crushes or Hollywood fantasy. It was his relationship with Eartha Kitt. Unlike the tangled and often exaggerated stories surrounding Dean's other affairs, his bond with Kitt had a depth that was both spiritual and unmistakably real. To her, he wasn't the brooding icon plastered across posters. He was simply Jamie. They became so close that she began calling them soul brother and sister. She later said that their affection unfolded naturally, and that she became not only his confidant, but also the person who taught him what it meant to truly command a stage. Yet for all the tenderness between them, Hollywood legend insists that their relationship took a detour into territory so wild it sounded like pure tabloid fantasy. Kitt once revealed that she had shared an intimate encounter with both James Dean and Paul Newman at the exact same time. It was the kind of revelation that made old Hollywood historians sit up straight. When she reflected on it later, she described the experience as celestial, saying those two beautiful men carried her to a place she never knew lovemaking could reach. But the heart of their connection went far beyond scandal. Dean and Kitt shared a background that grounded them. Two young people from rural roots, suddenly thrown into the chaos and clamor of a massive city. They bonded not over fame, but over feeling like outsiders navigating a world much bigger than themselves. That bond is why Kitt felt something was terribly off the last time she saw him in September 1955. She hugged him, and in that moment she felt nothing. None of the spirit or warmth she was used to. It unsettled her deeply. When she tried to tell him this, Dean brushed it off with his usual playful charm, teasing her about being on one of her voodoo trips again. But the unease stayed with her. And in the cruelest twist, her intuition proved right. Just days later, a chorus girl delivered the news that would confirm her fears. Jamie was gone. Kitt later said that she had already known it in her heart, because the man she hugged days earlier felt like an empty shadow. James Dean's life burned bright but painfully fast. By the age of 24, after only a handful of years in Hollywood, he was gone. And that leaves the lingering question behind his legend. What were the circumstances that led to such a tragic and sudden end? James Dean is remembered as a Hollywood icon, but away from the cameras, he carried a deep, electrifying passion for racing. This wasn't some casual hobby. He trained, he competed, and in 1955, he threw himself into 3 major races that showed just how serious he was. His first big event that year was the Palm Springs Road Race in March. Dean stunned everyone by taking first place in his class and finishing 3rd overall. When the original winner, Ken Miles, was disqualified, Dean was bumped up to second place. A remarkable start for someone still new to the racing world. Just 2 months later, he hit the track again at Minter Field in Bakersfield. Once more, he dominated his class and placed third overall. It looked like nothing could slow him down, but on Memorial Day, his streak faltered. After just 4.5 laps, his car blew a piston, forcing him out of the race. Then came production on his final film, Giant, in Marfa, Texas, and this is where his love for speed started clashing with Hollywood reality. Director George Stevens grew so concerned about Dean's risky driving that he added a clause to the contract, banning him from racing until filming wrapped. The studio even confiscated his company car, insisting he was tearing through those Texas roads way too fast. But stopping someone like James Dean was nearly impossible. On September 21st, he bought the car that would later define his legacy in the darkest way possible, a Porsche Spyder 550. Warnings came fast. Alec Guinness, along with director George Stevens, told him outright that the car felt dangerous. Stevens even cautioned him that if he brought the car onto the studio lot again, someone was going to die. Looking back, the warning feels almost prophetic. Then came September 30th, 1955, the day everything changed. Dean was headed to a racing event in Salinas behind the wheel of his new Spyder. His original plan was to tow the car, but his mechanic, Rolf Vuterick, urged him to drive it instead so he could get a proper feel for the machine before the competition. Dean agreed, and Vuterick rode beside him. It was a decision that would haunt Hollywood forever. And here's where the story takes an eerie turn. Not long before that drive, Dean had run into Alec Guinness outside a Hollywood restaurant. Proud and excited, Dean showed off his new Porsche. Guinness later described the car as a gleaming silver machine wrapped in cellophane with roses tied to its front. When he asked Dean how fast it could go, the young actor boasted that it could reach 150 miles per hour, despite never having driven it. In that moment, Guinness felt something he couldn't explain. He said it was as if another voice moved through him, pushing him to warn Dean. He told him not to get into that car, predicting that by the same time the following week, Dean would be dead if he did. It was a chilling warning. And in the most heartbreaking way possible, that premonition came true. Everything was steadily ticking down toward 3:30 p.m., and that was when something strangely eerie happened. James Dean was pulled over in Bakersfield and handed a speeding ticket. A small, almost throwaway moment that would later feel like a haunting omen of what was coming. After that brief delay, he stopped at a diner for a quick Coke. It was an ordinary moment, simple and quiet. Yet, with the clarity of hindsight, it becomes heartbreaking because Dean had no idea he had less than 2 hours left to live. By 5:45 p.m., he was back on the road, cruising along what was then known as US Route 466. And then the unthinkable happened. His Porsche collided head-on with a Ford Tudor sedan in a violent, devastating crash. The Ford spun wildly across the highway before skidding to a stop. Its driver, 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed, somehow escaped with only minor injuries. Dean's Porsche, however, was shattered. The impact sent it spinning through the air before it slammed back to the ground and rolled to the side of the road. James Dean still trapped inside its twisted frame. Turnipseed survived with just light injuries, but Dean was catastrophically hurt. His foot was crushed between the brake and clutch pedals, and the force of the collision broke his neck and arms. The damage inside his body was even more severe. Witnesses ran toward the wreckage, desperate to help, but they were stunned by how violently the crash had mangled him. His death was almost instantaneous. Miraculously, his passenger, Rolf Vuterick, survived the initial impact. Dean was rushed to the hospital, but at 6:20 p.m., he was pronounced dead on arrival. The attending doctor reported multiple fractures, deep lacerations, and extensive internal injuries. The coroner later confirmed the cause of death as a broken neck, noting several additional fractures, just in the jaw alone. Those who witnessed the crash had a startling account to share. Despite Dean's earlier speeding ticket, they insisted he wasn't driving recklessly at the moment of impact. Instead, they claimed turnip seed had veered into Dean's lane. With the fading daylight, it would have been incredibly difficult for turnip seed to even see the Porsche approaching. Yet the tragedy didn't end with his death. Almost immediately, eerie stories and rumors began swirling around Dean's life, his final moments, and especially the wreckage of his car. Some accounts later claimed that his final words, spoken just seconds before the collision, were a warning to his passenger. "That guy's gotta stop. He'll see us." Whether or not Vutherick truly remembered those words remains debated, but their haunting tone only added fuel to the legend. James Dean's shocking, untimely death didn't just cement his place in Hollywood legend, it opened the door to something much darker. Almost immediately, people started whispering about the wrecked Porsche, claiming it was cursed. And the more stories that surfaced, the harder it became to shrug them off. But what really unsettled fans was what turned up right after his death. A public service announcement he'd filmed about safe driving, recorded just days before the crash. The timing wasn't just eerie, it felt downright haunting. In the PSA, which still circulates online, the host introduces Dean as he arrives straight from a movie set, still dressed as a cowboy, complete with the lasso at his side. Their conversation begins innocently enough, centered on racing. The host makes a point to clarify that Dean was a professional track racer, not someone who tore recklessly through public streets. But then, the tone shifts. Dean openly admits that he used to speed around on the highways, taking risks he knew weren't necessary. He explains that racing had changed him. Since starting on the track, he had become more cautious on public roads, insisting he no longer felt the urge to speed. For him, the track felt safer than the unpredictability of the open highway. As he prepares to leave, the host asks one final question about advice for young drivers. Dean responds with a twist on a classic safety message, one that in hindsight feels jaw-droppingly eerie. It was a line that would stick with fans forever. As chilling as that coincidence was, the strangeness didn't stop there. What happened to Dean's Porsche, the infamous little bastard, only deepened the legend. Soon after the wreck was recovered, the car fell off a transport truck and crushed a mechanic's legs. That was only the beginning. A used car dealer bought the remains of the Porsche, stripped it for parts, and sold off the components. The cars that inherited the transmission, the engine, and even the tires were all later involved in violent crashes. The luck surrounding Little Bastard seemed poisoned. The most dramatic incident involved the Porsche's engine. It was sold to a doctor who installed it in his own car. During his very first drive with the engine, he was killed in a collision. Another buyer purchased 2 of the Porsche's tires, and both blew simultaneously while he was on the road, causing yet another serious accident. Then came the most bizarre twist of all. While the mangled chassis was being transported on a truck, the vehicle slid off the road. The driver died in the accident, but when investigators reached the scene, the chassis had vanished. It was simply gone. That disappearance still fuels the legend of James Dean's missing Porsche. The tragedy didn't end with the wreckage. Dean's passenger, Rolf Vutherick, survived the initial crash, but the emotional damage followed him for the rest of his life. The guilt consumed him. He attempted suicide twice, and later carried out a botched murder-suicide attempt, stabbing his wife 14 times. His own life ended in 1981, ironically, in yet another alcohol-related car crash. Dean's professional life also carried an eerie shadow, particularly his most iconic film, Rebel Without a Cause. The movie is often regarded as cursed due to the tragic ends of its principal cast. Dean died before the film was even released. Just over a decade later, his co-star Nick Adams died by overdose. In 1976, Sal Mineo was murdered in a brutal stabbing. And in 1981, Natalie Wood drowned under suspicious circumstances. By the time all 4 main stars had died prematurely, the idea of a curse didn't seem far-fetched to the public. These coincidences only deepened the mythology around James Dean. And as his celebrity legend grew, people began digging into his personal life, sending the rumor mill into overdrive. Among the most controversial accounts was the biography James Dean. Tomorrow Never Comes by Darwin Porter and Danforth Prince, a book that dove headfirst into his romantic relationships, especially his alleged same-sex affairs. Its most explosive claim was a supposed secret relationship between Dean and Marlon Brando. The theory seemed plausible on the surface. Both actors studied under Lee Strasberg, both had strong ties to director Elia Kazan, and both cultivated that intense, brooding persona that defined a generation. But according to the book, the relationship was deeply unbalanced. Dean supposedly cared far more for Brando than Brando cared for him. Composer Alec Wilde is quoted as believing Dean had genuinely fallen for Brando, while Brando remained emotionally distant. The book even alleges that Dean's infatuation turned obsessive, claiming he would wait outside Brando's home, staring up at his window for hours. The most disturbing allegation came from Dean's roommate, Rogers Brackett, who claimed he once saw Dean's body covered in burns. Burns Dean allegedly said were inflicted by Brando. At the time, the rumors painted Brando as a controlling force in the relationship. Brando, however, denied everything. In his memoir, he insisted he never had a friendship or romantic involvement with Dean at all. That cloud of uncertainty, the unclear truth behind Dean's private life, only heightened his mystique. Fans were left to interpret the fragments, fueling a fascination that still lingers. And then there was Pier Angeli, the woman many believed Dean had truly loved. Their relationship had ended long before his death, but after he passed, something heartbreaking was discovered among his belongings. An order for the solemnization of marriage pamphlet. In the blank space intended for the bride's name, Dean had handwritten Pier's name. It was a small, fragile document, but it revealed a secret that added another layer of tragedy. He had genuinely hoped to marry her. Sadly, Angeli herself died young, succumbing to a barbiturate overdose at the age of 39. A confession Dean took to his grave. The film giant brought together an extraordinary lineup of Hollywood talent. James Dean stepped into the role of Jet Ring, while Elizabeth Taylor portrayed Leslie Linton Benedict. For decades, whispers circulated about a possible on-set romance between the two, adding yet another layer of intrigue to the film's legacy. The cast didn't stop there. Jane Withers, Dennis Hopper, and the strikingly charismatic Rock Hudson all contributed to the movie's star power. Hudson, known for his leading man charm, kept his personal life fiercely private. Though he was a gay man, he maintained strict discretion throughout his career. In 1984, his life took a devastating turn when he was diagnosed with AIDS. 1 year later, he made an incredibly courageous and groundbreaking decision. He publicly confirmed his diagnosis. As one of the first major celebrities to do so, his announcement shook Hollywood and the world. When he passed away on October 2, 1985, at just 59, it marked a heartbreaking milestone in the early AIDS crisis and became a global wake-up call. Fast forward to the mid-1990s, when Elizabeth Taylor sat down for a deeply personal interview. She chose to open up about her bond with James Dean during the filming of Giant, but only under one condition. The information she revealed could not be shared until after her death. The writer honored that promise for more than a decade. Taylor explained that she and Dean often spent long nights in conversation, building a rare and sincere friendship. It was during one of those late-night talks that Dean confided a haunting story from his childhood. At just 11 years old, a few years after losing his mother, he had been abused by a minister. The revelation added a painful dimension to the already complex mythos surrounding James Dean. Years later, while accepting an honor at the GLAAD Media Awards, Taylor made a bold and historic statement. She publicly acknowledged that Dean was gay and included Rock Hudson and Montgomery Clift in her tribute to LGBTQ figures from Hollywood's golden age. Her earlier interview with Kevin Sessoms for Pause magazine, however, offered even deeper insight. In that conversation, she revisited Dean's private struggles and the trauma she believed had shadowed him throughout his life. She spoke about the close bond they formed on the set of Giant and how Dean had confided countless truths during their all-night conversations. When Sessoms asked her point-blank about Dean's sexuality, Taylor's answer was careful, but also quietly heartbreaking. She said that when he died, Dean still hadn't fully figured out his own identity. And honestly, that tracks. Throughout his life, James Dean never dodged the topic. When people asked if he was gay, he denied it, but then he'd drop one of his most famous lines. He didn't want to go through life with one hand tied behind his back. It was classic Dean, vague, bold, and just mysterious enough to keep everyone guessing. Years later, Hollywood columnist Joe Hyams offered a different perspective. He speculated that if Dean had engaged in relationships with men, it might have been less about attraction and more about ambition, another way to maneuver through the industry and advance his career. Rumors surrounding his private life stretch back to the early 1950s, particularly around 1954, when Dean played the role of Arab, a gay houseboy, in the Broadway production of The Immoralist. Writer Hal Hackaday later recalled that Dean seemed visibly uncomfortable with the role and disliked playing a gay character on stage. Yet when Hackaday was asked directly whether he believed Dean himself was gay, he stated that he had never heard anything to support that idea. Ironically, the same role that brought Dean so much discomfort became a turning point in his career. His performance in The Immoralist impressed the right people and led him to the life-changing opportunity of starring in East of Eden. As Dean's fame grew, public fascination with his personal life only intensified. Some believed that his relationships with women were intentional distractions, a way to conceal his true desires. Others believed he was gay and used those public romances as a shield. But the broader question remained: did it really matter? His private life, in any era, should have been his alone. Still, whether he was straight, gay, or somewhere in between, many observers argued that Dean understood how to use sexuality, its mystery, its allure, to boost his image and open doors. Because of his rapid rise and the many glamorous relationships attached to his name, some went so far as to suggest that he slept his way into Hollywood's inner circles. Stories about his behavior off-camera painted a portrait of someone who possessed almost magnetic charm. Despite reports that he sometimes had rough edges and even a few imperfect features, he drew intense admiration from both men and women alike. Accounts from those who knew him during his early years only add to the swirling rumors. James Bella, a college friend from UCLA, claimed he knew of at least one instance where Dean performed a sexual act in an agent's office to gain favor. Actor and filmmaker Mark Rydell echoed this sentiment, saying he didn't believe Dean was homosexual, but that he certainly had strong appetites and acted on them when it suited him. Then came even more sensational claims. Writer Kenneth Anger alleged that Dean had been financially supported by an older television producer early in his career. Anger also claimed that Dean engaged in edgy sexual behavior, contracted crabs during the filming of Rebel Without a Cause, and spent time at a bondage bar in East Hollywood looking for partners. Anger even asserted that Dean once avoided military service by telling a doctor that he had kissed a man. While some of Dean's peers believed he used sexual relationships strategically, several biographers offered a more personal perspective. John Gilmore, a friend and fellow motorcyclist, said that he and Dean had experimented sexually together in New York. He described their encounters as two rebellious young men exploring their bisexual sides. Gilmore later stated that he believed Dean was more gay than bisexual. Nicholas Ray, the director of Rebel Without a Cause, also weighed in. According to Ray, Dean acknowledged that he wasn't strictly drawn to one gender, saying more than once that he swung both ways. But this interpretation wasn't shared by everyone. Martin Landau, a close friend from the actor's studio, insisted that Dean seemed entirely focused on women whenever they spent time together. Elizabeth Taylor supported that idea as well, noting in an interview that Dean often flirted with women when the two of them went out. Looking back, it's hard not to consider how differently Dean's life might have unfolded if he had lived in a more open and accepting era. If he truly was bisexual or gay, he might have felt free to explore those aspects of himself without fear of career-ending consequences. In the end, the specifics of Dean's love life matter far less than the fascination they continue to generate. Whatever his orientation, his private relationships were his own. And yet, because of his untimely death, his mystery, and his enduring cultural impact, the speculation surrounding his sexuality remains one of the most debated and enduring elements of his legend. They just solved the James Dean crash mystery, and it's bad. In 2014, James Dean's tragic death became the focus of an episode of the documentary-style series Autopsy, The Last Hours of, a show known for digging into the final moments of famous figures. In that episode, forensic specialist Dr. Michael Hunter offered a striking perspective on what may have happened in the critical moments after Dean's crash. Dr. Hunter explained that Dean might have had a stronger chance of survival if his neck had been properly stabilized with a brace before paramedics moved him. The scene described in reports paints a grim picture. Dean was pinned inside the mangled Porsche, so tightly trapped that rescuers had to pry him out with a crowbar. One of his feet was wedged between the pedals. Despite the devastating injuries and his unconscious state, he was still breathing by the time help arrived. But the chain of tragedy didn't stop there. According to Dr. Hunter, the ambulance transporting Dean collided with another vehicle on the way to the hospital. An impact he believes further reduced the young actor's already slim chances of making it through. Even in death, James Dean's talent continued to be recognized. He earned 2 posthumous Academy Award nominations, one in 1956 for East of Eden and another in 1957 for Giant, an extraordinary accomplishment that cemented his legacy as a Hollywood icon. 50 years after the crash, in 2005, fans gathered again at the site where it all happened. The roads have shifted over time, but a sign still stands today, reading James Dean Memorial Junction, marking the place where the legend's life was cut short. Visitors who make the journey to his gravesite in Park Cemetery in Fairmount, Indiana, often find a touching scene. His headstone is covered in lipstick marks left by admirers, silent tributes from generations of fans who continue to celebrate the enduring spirit of the rebel without a cause. James Dean's secret love letters revealed tragic details. Decades after James Dean's tragic and untimely death, some remarkably intimate details about his love life finally began to surface. The source of these revelations is Keith Gordon, an American actor and film director who now owns several deeply personal letters written by Dean himself. Keith's connection to the story runs through his mother, actress Barbara Glenn, who was once romantically involved with Dean. Before Keith's parents passed away, they each gave him very different instructions about what to do with these letters. On her deathbed, Barbara insisted he must never let them go. His father, Mark Gordon, felt the exact opposite, urging Keith to get rid of them entirely. Ever since, he has been caught in an impossible emotional tug-of-war, knowing that honoring one parent's final wish means betraying the other. The letters came from a pivotal time in Dean's life, right as his star was rising. Dean and Barbara had first been introduced by actor Martin Landau, and from there, their romance took off. When Dean left New York for California to pursue Hollywood, the two stayed close, maintaining a bond that Keith later described as part romance and part friendship. In 2011, Keith decided to auction 3 of the letters through Christie's in London. One was dated January 10, 1954, written while Dean was rehearsing for a Broadway adaptation of The Immortalist. In it, he confessed that he felt unsure about the quality of his own performance, yet confidently predicted that the play would be a monster success. He wrote the letter from the St. James Hotel in Philadelphia and even decorated it with small sketches of nearby buildings. Another letter, sent on May 7, 1954, came a month after he began filming his first major leading role in East of Eden. And then there was the letter that captured Dean's mischievous humor. He teased Barbara that their relationship might be over because he had fallen in love, before revealing that his new obsession was actually his horse, Cisco the Kid. Across all three letters, Dean repeatedly expressed how homesick he felt, and he often thanked Barbara for writing what he considered the sweetest notes he had ever received. Keith later shared that his mother rarely spoke about their romance, but he knew it was her first truly serious relationship. It was a turbulent one, too, full of passionate breakups and reconciliations. Even when they weren't officially together, Barbara remained one of Dean's closest confidants. Of course, Keith didn't sell everything. He kept several letters, the more revealing ones, for over a decade. These letters paint a vivid portrait of Dean as someone intensely devoted to his craft, forever pushing himself to do better. They also reveal a man who had little patience for foolishness but carried a sharp sense of humor beneath his brooding exterior. But perhaps the most striking element found in those letters is Dean's loneliness. In many of them, he poured out his frustration and heartache over being far from Barbara, struggling with the emotional distance more than he liked to admit. Keith once described Dean as intense, lonely, and at times confused, qualities that shine through these private writings. One particular letter reveals a moment of tension. Dean lashed out at Barbara for accepting a swimsuit modeling job, accusing her of selling herself short and equating the gig to something far more questionable. The reaction was so extreme that even Keith found it strange. After all, both Dean and his mother were part of what Keith called the super hip 1950s crowd, where most people wouldn't have cared about a job like that. But Dean, it seems, held on to more conservative views than many of his artistic peers. Growing up, Keith considered his mother's romance with Dean a kind of family secret. His father's jealousy played a role in keeping it quiet, though Keith always understood why. Dean had been a defining part of Barbara's youth, and the relationship held a permanent place in her memories. Keith even suspected that their brief romance might have been the great love of his mother's life. Not long before Dean died, Barbara had told him that she met Mark, the man she would eventually marry. In the last letter Dean ever wrote to her, he described Mark as a good man. Dean admitted that what he and Barbara shared had been too wild and too chaotic to ever survive. He told her he was glad she had found stability with someone else. For Keith, that final letter is the most precious of all. It's the one he is least willing to part with. It means so much to him because it touches his own life directly. Dean's acceptance, his willingness to step aside and let Barbara move on, may have shaped the course of her future. Keith often reflects on the possibility that without that final blessing, he himself might never have existed.